Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and click on that like button if you like my video. Also click on that notification bell. Thank you.
Hey folks, welcome to our complete Microsoft SQL Server Database Administration course. Do you know SQL Database Administration is one of the best career in IT? And an average salary of a database administrator is about $110,000 per year. According to the US Labor Department, this trend or the number of jobs for SQL database administrator will continue to increase 10% every year. Yes, my name is Imran Afzal and I have over 20 years of experience in IT. I have worked for Fortune 500 companies all over in the United States and more specifically in New York City. I have been teaching since 2010 and I have helped so many of my students get the job of their dream in IT. I have a bachelor's degree from Baruch College in Computer Information Systems and I have master's from New York Institute of Technology. I'm really proud to partner for this course with Abbas Mahmood, who has over 16 years of experience in IT. And he will make sure he will hold your hand and teach you everything you need to know about SQL database administration. So I welcome Abbas. Abbas, please join me.
Thanks, Imran. Database administration is what I do for a living, and it is also my passion. I have designed this course for someone who has no prior knowledge of Microsoft SQL Server Database Administration, and they want to start their career as a SQL Server DBA. And also for someone who wants to level up their IT skills. And of course for someone who became an accidental database administrator. Hi, my name is Abbas Mahmood, and I have worked with government and private organizations in New York City since 2005. I have a bachelor's and a master's degree in computer science from City University of New York. Well, by the end of this course, I guarantee you that you will learn so much about Microsoft SQL Server Database Administration, and you will be so good in that when you will apply for a SQL Server Database Administrator job, you are going to get that. And when you will get the job, you will not be an ordinary DBA. You will be one of the best among the best. Fair enough? With that, let's start our journey to become a great, successful SQL Server Database Administrator. Thank you.
Hey folks, let's spend a couple of minutes and have a course overview as to what exactly we are covering in this course. We have broken down this entire course in 13 different sections. In section 1, it's introduction. We'll talk about everything about database, relational databases, what is SQL, introduction to Microsoft Server SQL. Then we'll come down to section 2. That's where we set up our lab. We'll download, install, and configure Windows. So in order to download the Windows, we need a virtualization software. So we could go with either VMware Workstation or Oracle VirtualBox. Then we'll create a virtual machine and install our Windows machine. In section 3, that's where we're going to go and download and install Microsoft SQL Server because we do have the lab environment set up now. Now it's time to go with the installation of actual databases. We'll also download and install AdventureWorks database, which is like a test database that we will be using in this entire course. Then coming down to section 4, database fundamental and design. We'll talk about data, how it is stored, what is the table, column, and row, what are the different type of keys that you need to know, what is a transaction and ACID properties, and so much more. Section 5, introduction to SQL commands, basic SQL commands, what is SQL statements, and type of statements. Those statements consist of DML, DDL, DCL, and TCL. What do they stand for? We'll cover in that section. Coming down to section 6, query and manipulation of data using SQL. Now, this is the section where you need to know everything about SQL queries. Now, regardless which database you are using, all the queries are pretty much the same. So here we'll learn about select commands, we'll learn about where clause, order by, having by, we'll talk about joins, insert, update, delete, and truncate statements, so much in this section. Then section 7, Microsoft SQL Database Administration. We'll cover the overview of MS SQL Management Tool. We'll cover exploring Server Management Studio, Configuration Manager. As a database administrator, you should and should not do. And then we'll also talk about the different type of other system databases. In section 8, a deep dive into MS SQL working, such as pages, extents, page architectures, and PFS. We'll also talk about the database architectures, its working, and its transaction log, configuring user database best practice while creating user database. In section 9, MS SQL backup and restore. Anything you being a database administrator you need to know about backup and restore, this is the section you have to focus on. We'll talk about the database, the differential database, transaction log database, and so much more. In section 10, MS SQL user management. Now each database gotta have its users as well who manage the database. So in this section we'll cover how we could create those users and how we could manage them. Section 11, server agent management, everything about you need to know about SQL Server Agent, Agent Alerts, Operation, Database Mill, Activity Monitor. Section 12, Advanced SQL Server Administration Topics. Now, these are all these topics that you're not going to find in any other SQL course because this is full of advanced topics like high availability, replication, transactional, and transactional replication setup, MS SQL data encryption, and so much more. In section 13, we'll have a course recap and we'll cover all the commands, all the things that we have learned in this entire course. So now you be the judge and tell me if this is the right course for you, where we have covered so many things about you, about SQL that you need to know, and where you will become an SQL expert. So, again, let's go and enroll and let's start this journey together. Hey everyone, in this lecture we are going to talk about the database. Database is another component of IT or computers. So, before we understand what a database is, let's separate data from the base. So, what is a data? Well, data is a collection of facts such as numbers, words, measurements, observations, or just description of things. For example, your name, age, height, weight, etc. are some data related to you. A picture, image, file, PDF, etc. can also be considered as data. So now, what is the base? Base is something like a system, a foundation, or a hub, or a central location where all the data come together. So now, let's look at the database definition. A database is an organized and systematic collection of data, generally stored and accessed electronically from a computer system. Databases make data management a lot easier. Now comes the question is, data can be stored in a spreadsheet or a text document as well. So why we need a database? Well, that's a good question. Like we use spreadsheets or we have a text document, we could put our name, our age, and all that information into those documents. So why do we really need the database compared to those regular flat files? Well, database store information more efficiently. Databases can handle volumes of information that would be unmanageable in a spreadsheet. Spreadsheets have record limitations, whereas databases do not. Compared to databases, spreadsheet can require a large amount of hard drive space for data storage, whereas in databases it takes a lot less space on your storage. Also, in database, joining records is a lot easier than compared to text or spreadsheet. So let's say if you have a spreadsheet that only tells you the age and let's say some information, date of birth of a user. In another spreadsheet, there is names and the address of that user. So sometimes when you wanted to get all that data in one line or in one record, so combining those two spreadsheets, it's a lot harder than compared to running some join SQL statements to combine that record. So that's why we have database. The pulling the database or data out of database is a lot easier than compared to these simple files. Hey folks, at this time we know that we will be using Microsoft SQL Server for this entire course. So let's go ahead and explore a little bit more about what MS SQL Server is. MS SQL Server is a suite of database software published by Microsoft and used extensively in enterprise world or corporate world. It includes a relational database engine which stores data in tables, columns, and rows. It has integration services, which is called SSIS, which is a data movement tool for importing, exporting, and transforming data. So, of course, you need some type of tool to import data from somewhere, or you could export your data that you already have to another database. And you need this tool for that purpose. Then you need a reporting services, which is SSRS, which is used to create reports and serve reports to end users. And then we have analysis services, which is a multi-dimensional database used to query data from the main database engine. So to put it in a graphical way and to visualize it, here's the relational database engine, which stores database in tables, columns, integration services, reporting services, and analysis. In this course, we will download, install, and configure MS SQL Server 2016 as well as 2019 full enterprise evaluation version, which will be installed on Windows Server operating system. So if you are using MS SQL Server 2016, then you have to go with Windows Server 2016. And if you are using MS SQL Server 2019, then you would have to go with operating system Windows Server 2019, which we have covered both of them, the download and installation in this course. Please note the evaluation version for these operating systems and databases is for 180 days, which equates to 6 months. And you should be finishing this course within 6 months, which will give you enough time to go through the course, finish it, and learn a lot of things about Microsoft SQL Server. Approximately 85% of the corporate companies as of today around the world uses Microsoft SQL version either 2016 or 2019 or older, of course. That is why our focus is on these versions. Also, the SQL Server Management Studio needed to be installed as an additional software that will be used to manage and maintain the databases, run SQL queries, perform backups, and analyze performance charts. Each version is named by the years, as you could see. So there is MS SQL Server 2016 and 19 and so on. But they are not exactly released in those specific years. Most recent Microsoft SQL versions are as follow: SQL Server 2014, SQL Server 2016, 17, and SQL Server 2019. So in our course, our focus is to go either with SQL Server 2016 or SQL Server 2019. Whichever you decided to choose, we have including instructions for both. All right, let's look at some of the pros and cons about MS SQL Server. So on the pro side, various supported edition, it has a lot of editions that we could use. It has online product documentation. Microsoft Premier support that comes with the MS SQL Server. In case something goes wrong, you need help with troubleshooting, or there's a bug fix, you have a support. It has on-premise and cloud database support as well. It has plenty of tools, applications to use, and it has a support for use on Linux platform as well. Now, on the con side, it is relatively expensive enterprise edition, and of course it's not free, so you would have to pay for it. And the licensing piece is a bit cumbersome. It's difficult licensing process that's always changing. Now, one very important note, and that is regardless which relational database management system we choose, our end goal is that you understand how to read, write, and manipulate data using our SQL statements. So it doesn't matter if you choose Oracle SQL Server or Maria database or MS SQL Server, we will be using the SQL structured query structure language against these databases, and that's what our end goal is. Hey everyone! In this video, we are going to cover SQL. What is SQL? SQL stands for Structured Query Language, and it's a programming language used to communicate with data stored in a relational database management system. SQL syntax is similar to the English language, which makes it relatively easy to read, write, update, or translate data. SQL is often pronounced in one of the two ways. You could pronounce it by speaking each letter individually, like SQL, or you could pronounce it using the word SQL. Now, what is the right word? But it really doesn't matter. You could pronounce it SQL or SQL, but let's get into a brief history of where the SQL came from. It was invented in 1970s by IBM, and the first version was called SEQUEL, SQL, which stood for Structured English Query Language. Later, it was changed to SQL because SQL, or those letters, was already trademarked by an airline company. And I'm sure other companies don't want it to get into any kind of lawsuits. So they changed it to SQL. But still today, a lot of people who are in IT, you will notice, pronounce it as SQL. SQL is not a database. Now, I want everyone to pay close attention here. A lot of people think that SQL, hey, it's a database. No, to define it correctly, SQL is a command line language that many relational database management systems use to access the data from tables. So it's just a language. So people who are familiar with, for example, Linux, you probably notice there are so many Linux flavors. There's a Red Hat, CentOS, Ubuntu, Fedora, Unix, Linux, Solaris. But when you log into the system, 90 or 80% of the commands that you use are the same. But it's just that the operating system is different, the name's different, but we use the same bash shells, or we use the same commands to access the data. Similarly, SQL is structured the same way. This language is used to pull the data or manipulate the data from a database or relational database. Example statement of SQL is like select asterisk, asterisk means all, from table name. That's what I meant when I said in the first um, paragraph that SQL syntax is similar to the English language. So it becomes very easy because of the statement that is used to put the whole query together are actually derived from the English language. And that is, again, you could see select, from, where, join, which we will cover later on. I'll see you in the next lecture. Hey folks, in this lecture we are going to cover the RDBMS. RDBMS stands for Relational Database Management System, and its definition is a relational database is also a type of database. It uses a structure that allows us to identify and access data in relation to another piece of data in the database. Often data in a relational database is organized into tables. Okay, so you're probably thinking, hey, Imran, what's the difference between a regular database and relational database? Well, that's a very good question, and I could explain you in a visual way. So here's a database, and you have a table here. So let's see, this is the employee table who work in an organization. We have the employee numbers, we have the employee identification number, the name, and which department they work on. Then we have another table that has the employee identification number, their address, and their phone number. Now, in a regular database, let's say if you are saving some files, you have two spreadsheets where you have all these data saved, and they are saved on your disk. And in operating system world, that saving of the data is in a folder or in structured way, it's called file system. But in a database world, that's also a structure of data. or a database. So when you have those two spreadsheets in your file system, there is no relation between these two spreadsheets. So you cannot combine those two spreadsheets to pull the information. So then comes in the relation database. In relation database, we have this one table. And then we have the second table. And there is a relation. We could have a relation between two tables. And let's say we could pull out a similar or same field that is identical between these two tables. And in this case, you notice that employee ID is the same field that can be found in both tables. So we could use that IDs and from table 1 and go to table 2 and join that. So if I wanted to know what is the address of Imran Afzal, and I know from table 1 that Imran Afzal's ID is 10001. So I'm going to take that ID and I'm going to find that and search for that ID to join in the second table so I could get Imran Afzal's address, and it will pull me the address, which will be like three someplace and the phone number. That's what the relational database. And in this entire course we will be covering everything about the relational database. Hey boys and girls, in this video we are going to cover the top 5 relational database management systems that use SQL. Now, there are many of them, but we are focusing only on the first 5 ones that are mostly used in the IT environment. And the very first one is the Oracle database. It is a relational database product by Oracle, and its enterprise version was released in 1979. It is a database commonly used for running online transaction processing, data warehousing, and mixed database workloads. Oracle is one of the biggest vendor in IT market. Then comes the Microsoft SQL Server, which is often referred as MS SQL Server. So MS SQL Server is a relational database server by Microsoft. Its first version was released in 1988. It is among the most stable, secure, and reliable database solutions out there. It supports wide variety of transaction processing, analytics, and business intelligence applications in corporate IT environments. MS SQL Server competes primarily against Oracle Database and IBM Database DB2. Then moving on to our MySQL. A Swedish company called MySQL AB originally developed MySQL in 1994. It's a community developed open source and its first version was released in 1995. The US tech company Sun Microsystem took full ownership when they bought MySQL AB in 2008, and I believe they paid almost like $1 billion to purchase that company. Then the US tech giant Oracle in 2009 acquired Sun Microsystem itself, and MySQL has been practically owned by Oracle since. Even though MySQL is open source software, sorry, you could go on the website and download and install free. But you can buy a commercial license version from Oracle to get a premium support services for it. The main advantages of MySQL are that it is easy to use, inexpensive, reliable, has been around since 1995, and has a large community of developers who can help answer your questions if you do not want to get the support from Oracle. Then comes the PostgreSQL. It's a community developed open source as well, and its first version was released in 1987. It was originally named as Postgres, referring to its origin as the successor to the Ingress database developed at the University of California, Berkeley. In 1996, the project was renamed to Postgres SQL to reflect its support for SQL or SQL. After a review in 2007, the development team decided to keep the name Postgres SQL. Then comes the last one, Maria Database or MariaDB. Community developed open source as well, and its first version was released in 2009. Development is led by the same original developers a Swedish developer of MSQL who forked it due to the concern over its acquisition by Oracle Corporation in 2009. MariaDB is named after Monty's younger daughter Maria. And by the way, Monty was the first person who first developed the MySQL in Sweden. Now, in this course, our focus will be on Microsoft SQL Server or MS SQL Server. Hey everyone, and welcome back. In this lecture, we are going to cover the different editions of Microsoft SQL Server. And the very first one is the Enterprise Edition. It's a premium offering. SQL Server Enterprise Edition delivers comprehensive, high-end data center capabilities with blazing fast performance. Unlimited virtualization and end-to-end business intelligence, enabling high service levels for mission-critical workloads and end users access to data insights. So, for the larger organization, which has a huge volume of data and they need to protect that data or have that data available at all times, the enterprise version is the one that allows them to set up or have a feature of high availability setup where you could run the database on different servers or multiple servers and have them replicated. Then comes the standard edition. It delivers basic data management and business intelligence database for department and small organizations. Then comes the versions or web edition. The SQL Server Web Edition is low total cost of ownership option for web hosting companies. So any company who mostly deals with e-commerce, the web edition is best suited for them. Then there is a developer edition. I could summarize the developer edition by saying that it is the exact same edition as enterprise, but it is given or it is used by developers, programmers, QA users to actually test their applications on top of the SQL Enterprise editions. And it is, of course, can be downloaded for free, but it cannot be used as a production purposes. Because if Microsoft finds out that an organization is using a developer version for production, that organization can be heavily fined. Then you have the Express version, and it's a very small edition, and it's an entry level free database and is ideal for learning and building desktops and small server data driven application. It is the best choice for independent software vendors, developers, and hobbyists building client application. If you need more advanced database features, this SQL Express can be seamlessly upgraded to other higher end versions of SQL Server. So, these are the few additions that Microsoft SQL Server has to offer. And in our course, we are going to use the enterprise version. And the reason we're using that, so you will have the full exposure to what the real SQL or relational database is used in corporate environment, because that's where you're going to end up working. Hello, everyone. Let's take a look at virtualization. What is virtualization? Before we get into explaining the concept of virtualization, let's take a look and understand of how physical system configuration works. So, in a regular world, as you could see, there is a physical server. A physical server could be like a Dell or HP or any of those manufacturers that build a physical server. On that physical server, what do you do when you get that physical server? You actually install an operating system on top of it. And that operating system could be Windows, could be Linux, or any of the operating system of your choice, right? Then what happens? You install the operating system, and then on top of that operating system, you run your applications. Those applications are, for example, Excel, Word in Windows world, in Linux world, you'll run like a DNS application, NTP application. In a regular applications, where rarely enterprise level application like ERP, SAP, PeopleSoft, all of those applications run on on that platform where the operating system is. So this is how you see an ideal or in a regular world how the layout works. Now, what's the problem with this? The problem with this is you have a physical server. The physical server has 16 gig of RAM and 4 CPU. And then you install operating system on top of it. Operating system only needs 4 gig of RAM and 2 CPU to run. And then you install an application on top of it, and that application only needed 2 gig of RAM and 1 CPU for that application. What happens then? Then you have 8 gig of RAM and 2 CPU that are wasted. Yes, resources are underutilized. That's why the virtualization was born. People thought, they sat down, they said, you know what? We have this physical server with so much resources. We only run one operating system and one application, and everything else is wasted. We gotta come up with a better solution. So now let's look at the virtualization. When virtualization came into being, then what happened? What happened was there's a physical server, same way, running Dell on HP, whichever whoever the manufacturer is. Then you install a virtualization layer on top of it. A virtualization layer from anywhere, like from VMware, from Oracle Virtualization. Then you install operating systems on it. So you could install 2, 3, 4, how many operating system you can, depending on the resources that you have on the physical system. And then on top of those operating systems, you have the application individually run on each of that operating system. Now, what's the advantage? Let's look at the advantage. That's a physical server. Again, going back to 16 gig of memory and 4 CPU, you install a virtualization layer which takes up all your CPU memory and CPU. Perfect. Then that operating systems you have, then applications, each of that operating system application has 4 gig and 1 CPU. So each of that operating system has given all those resources. What happens then? All resources are fully utilized, now wasted. See how we could take the full advantage of all those resources? So again, one more thing. Remember those days when you have one physical server and one operating system, and then people came up with another idea of, you know what, split the disk in half and let's do dual boot. So one of the partition would run, let's say Linux, and one partition would run Windows. But the problem was with that is you could run only one operating system at a time. In virtualization, this is the beauty of the virtualization. You don't have to have one operating system run at one given time. You could run both or 3 or 4 operating systems at all times, all at the same time. That's why the virtualization is so important and so beneficial. Again, in layman's term, virtualization is something is really not real, but it is actually real. It is utilizing the system resources and sharing those system resources among all the operating system that runs on that physical server. In this video, we will learn how to download and install Windows Server 2019. So we have our physical machine, either it's a desktop, it's a PC, a Mac, a laptop, and then you have some kind of operating system. For example, you have Windows operating system. Then what we did, we installed a virtualization software. We installed VMware Player, or you had the option to go with Oracle VirtualBox. When we had this virtualization software already installed, then we went ahead and we created a virtual machine, or like a container with the needed resources to install the operating system. So when the virtual machine is created, now it's time to install the Windows Server operating system on this virtual machine. All right, so where is our virtual machine? Our virtual machine is on VMware Player. So let's go ahead and start our VMware Player. I have already started right here. This is the virtual machine console, VMware Workstation Player 16. And the virtual machine that we created earlier, we named it MySQL Server. So now we need to download and attach the Windows Server 2019 edition, the ISO file, which is a evaluation file. And for that, you could go to your any browser of your choice. I'm going with Firefox. Go to Google or any search engine of your choice and simply type Windows 2019 download. Hit enter and then come down to the second link where it says Microsoft sorry, Windows Server 2019 Microsoft Evaluation Center. Click on this one and it will bring you straight to the page where you could download. So right here it says, please select your Windows Server 2019 download. Now there are different languages that you could pick from. Of course, I'm going with English United States. Click on 64-bit edition. And once you click on it, you will see it starts to download. Now the download can take anywhere from 5 minutes to 10 minutes depending on your network speed. I have already downloaded this ISO file to save some time. So the file is downloaded. So let's say if you have downloaded this file on your desktop. All right, so let's go to our VMware Workstation 16 player again, and now click on Edit Virtual Machine Setting. Once you come to the hardware options right here where it says CD/DVD, right here you click on Use ISO image. Now specify where the ISO image is. I have my ISO image on my desktop, which is right here. It's downloaded and selected, and I'm going to click OK and then OK. So now it is attached. Now go ahead and click on this power on or play virtual machine. Both of these options will perform the same functions. As soon as power's on, make sure you hit enter, click inside and hit enter so it picks up the ISO image. Now, if you wanted to get your cursor back, you will notice your cursor is captured inside of the window. If it is captured, just hit Control and Alt, both buttons at the same time. It will release your cursor. Then you can move around the window. All right, so if you wanted to go back inside the window, just simply click inside the window. It says Windows Server 2019, language install English, time, keyboard US, everything leave it default if you are in United States, or pick a different region or language if you are in a different part of the world. Click next. Windows Server 2019 install now. Setup it's starting. Now there are certain times when I'm going to be fast forwarding the installation. Okay, so right here it says operating system, the options that we wanted to install. Which one do you want to pick? There's a standard edition, the standard evaluation, data center evaluation, and data center evaluation desktop experience. Pick the last one. This option installs a full Windows graphical environment, consuming extra device space. It can be useful if you want to use a Windows desktop or have an app that requires it. Yes, we want that. Click next. Accept the license terms. Next. Okay, which type of installation do you want? There are two options, upgrade and custom. Install Windows and keep file settings and application. The file settings and applications are moved to Windows with this option. This option is only available when a supported version of Windows is already running on this computer. Now we do not have an already running operating system and we are not doing an upgrade. So we are going with the second option, custom install Windows. All right, so once you select it, it automatically picks your hard disk that you actually carved out for this virtual machine. We picked 50 gig, already selected, beautiful. Click next. All right, status, copying files, getting files ready for installation, 0%, then it's going to go installing features, installing updates, finishing it up. Now, this can take anywhere from 10 minutes to 20 minutes. Again, it depending on your system speed, how fast it is. I am going to fast forward from this point. You could wait or pause the video right now until it finishes, and I will see you when the installation is fully complete. Okay, so now it's time to enter or choose your password. Pick a password that you'll remember. Click Finish. All right, your Windows machine is up and ready. You could go ahead and install tools if you get this option. These are the VMware tools that will run in the background. You could go in and click player, and you could do send control alt and delete and enter your password. Please wait for the user, apply profile settings. And this completes your Windows Server 2019 installation. Good luck. Hello, charming people. In this video, we are going to download and install Windows 2016 on our virtual machine. So again, put that back everything into our graphical view. So we have our computer running Windows or Mac, then we install virtualization software, VMware Player, or Oracle VirtualBox. By the way, one thing I do want to point out that if you are running your Mac operating system as your base operating system, then you would have to install VMware Fusion, which is a compatible version, a compatible virtualization software that runs on Mac. Okay, after the installation of these virtualization software, we created our virtual machine with the required specification. Now it's time that we go ahead and install Windows Server 2016. And then once that is completed, this is going to create our physical or in our infrastructure to run our Microsoft SQL Server. Okay, so let's go to my Firefox browser and I am simply going to type download Windows download Windows Server 2016. Download or install, doesn't matter. You could take out the install part. Download Windows Server 2016. Now, go to make sure you're going to the Microsoft website where it says try Windows Server 2016 on Microsoft Evaluation Center. Good, so go click on it. Okay, so it will bring us to the Evaluation Center page and you will see the Windows Server products and resources. If you wanted to go to with Windows Server 2019, which is the latest version, you could go with this one. But for our course, our recommendation is that you go with Windows Server 2016. All right, so start your evaluation, click on ISO image and click continue. Now it's going to ask you for certain information to provide. You need to put in your first name, your last name, your company name. Now, if you do not have a company, you could simply put in home. Company size, you could just select one, which is yourself. Job title, you could just put other IT professional or researcher, academic, or student. Then you put in your work email. Now, you could use your personal email, it doesn't have to be work, and you could put your personal phone number. Then the country region, pick the country that you are in from this drop down menu, and then simply click continue. Once you click continue in the next slide, or sorry, in the next screen, it will give you that downloadable link. So I have already downloaded the ISO file because the download can take anywhere from 5 minutes to 20 minutes depending on your internet speed. The download file size is a 6.5 gigabyte, so it's going to take some time. So anyway, you should go ahead and click on download and start the download process. So I have finished the download and right here it says completed Windows Server 2016 Data Center Enterprise US version. I refresh ISO and the completed file size is 6.5. Okay, and that is actually sitting on my desktop. Now, the next step is that we are going to start up our virtual machine and we're going to attach that ISO image to that virtual machine so it could boot off of this ISO image. Okay, so let's go to our VMware workstation. Let's open that up. Okay, we have already created our MS SQL Server virtual machine. Now here I want you to select and go to Edit Virtual Machine Setting. And then go to CD DVD SATA Auto Detect. And right here I want you to select the Use ISO image. And then click on Browse. Now you should go to the location where your Microsoft Windows Server 2016 ISO image is saved. I have saved or downloaded to my desktop, and this is where the location is. So go ahead and select that and click Open. Okay, make sure it says Connect at Power On. If it's not checked, go ahead and click on Check. Connected, it will be connected as soon as you power on your virtual machine. Now go ahead and click OK. Now, as soon as it closes that window, I want you to click on Power Virtual Machine. Or you could also click here, which will do the same thing, Power Virtual Machine. So let's start that our virtual machine and make sure as soon as it comes up, you click it inside and hit Enter. Remind me later if that message shows up again. It is telling you to install VMware Tools. We will install VMware Tools at the end of our Microsoft Windows Server 2016 installation. Okay, very good. The installation Windows setup is here. Click inside and language to install English, time and currency English, United States, and keyboard or input method United States. Now, of course, I am in United States. That's why I'm picking these region setting, the time setting. If you are in any other country, please pick according to your region. Now click Next. Windows Server 2016 install now. Setup is starting. Now, during this entire installation, there will be time when the installation will take a certain time, and I will definitely go ahead and fast forward on during that time to save us time. So in this operating system, select the operating system you want to install. Go ahead and pick the bottom one, which is Windows Server 2016 Data Center Evaluation Version. This option is useful when a GUI is required. So we do need GUIs in Windows, so click Next. Okay, a license agreement. I accept the license term. If you wanted to read it, I encourage you to go ahead and read it and click next. Now, which type of installation do you want? Upgrade. Upgrade is if you already have a Windows machine up and running on this virtual machine. You do not be installing for the first time, so go ahead with the custom install Windows only advanced. This is going to show you that that operating system will be installed on that disk, which is 50 gig, which we created for our virtual machine. Very good. Now go ahead and click next. All right, so it says Windows copying Windows file completed, getting files ready for installation, 0%. This has to be completed to 100%, and this could take anywhere from 5 minutes to half an hour. So be patient, and I'm going to fast forward from this point on. When it's completed, then I'll come back and we will continue the installation. Okay, so the installation is almost completed and now it's going to restart our Windows machine. All right, customize setting. Type a password for the built-in administrator account that you can use to sign into this computer. Okay, put in a password. Please make sure you remember that password. Don't lose that password, otherwise you have to reinstall the Windows Server. So I'm gonna pick a password that I would remember and click finish. Okay, very good. So now you have this installation completion screen. It says press Alt Control Delete to unlock. Now, if you do that, it will unlock your entire machine. Sorry, it will lock your entire machine. So if you wanted to make sure you are sending the commands, the keyboard commands to only this virtual machine, then you could do is Alt Control Insert, and that will work for your virtual machine. Okay, put in the password. Okay, your Windows is starting up for the first time. Okay, there are a couple of things we have to do here before we hand that over to our database guy, our database expert, Abbas. So before we do that, it's asking you some information. Do you want to allow your PC to be discoverable? You could just simply say no. And every time you're going to start up your computer, your server manager window is going to open up. If you do not want this manager to open up, I think you have to go to manage. Create right here. Do not start server manager automatically at logon. So simply select this one. All right, anyway, cancel this out, close this window. And now the very first thing I want you to do is install the tool. See right here? Let's go ahead and click on it. Download and install. Now, VMware tools are the tools that comes with your VMware software that allows you to have the proper communication between your host right here and with your virtual machine. Also, it will download and install the enhanced drivers. So as soon as this DVD D drive VMware tools shows up, click on it and then click a run setup64.exe. Click next, typical, next, install. Also, once the Windows VMware tools are installed, you see right now you could only keep your window or Windows Server window open up only for this size. And if you want to make it bigger, you cannot unless you install these VMware tools. Very good. Go ahead, click on finish. And it is going to say you must restart your system for the configuration changes to VMware tools. So right now, I just want you to click no because there is one more thing we have to make changes to, and we will restart the computer at once. So click no. I'll go here on the search and type PC, sorry, my computer or this PC. Right click on it and go to properties. Okay, right here you see the computer name is coming up Win S 6SA961. We got to change that. But now before we change that, you verify the processor. We gave it the 4 gig of CPU. The system type is 64-bit operating system. And by the way, if your main computer has 32, you should not be using that computer. You should use the one that has 64. All right, go ahead, change setting. Computer description. So to rename this computer, change its domain or work, we'll click change. And I want you to name it Lab SQL Server. And this is something that I have already picked out. So I write here lab, sorry, not SQL Server, Lab MS SQL. Lab MS SQL. Click OK. You must restart your computer to apply these changes. Now click OK, close, and now restart. All right. Again, you could do Alt Control Insert to log in, or you could come here. You see this send Alt Control Delete to virtual machine. You could click on this one, and it will do the same thing as if you are doing Alt Control Insert on your keyboard. Put in your password to log in. Okay. Now we are logged in. Just make sure the computer name is changed. Right click, properties. And right here you see it says Lab MS SQL. Very good. Close this server manager again. And now the next thing we have to do is change the time. So click on it, date, date and time settings, and make sure you pick the time zone depending on the region or time zone that you are in. I'm in Eastern US time zone, so I'm gonna go to Eastern right here, Eastern time zone, and just make sure everything else is okay. If you want to change the date format, short time, long time, anything that you want to change, that's it. Click close, and you will see the time, the correct time will show up here. Now this right here says Windows Server 2016 data center evaluation 180 days. This will keep reminding you that you have Windows Server evaluation version only for 180 days, which is 6 months. So it means that you have to finish this course within 6 months. So this way, if you are coming back after 6 months, you have to go through and reinstalling the operating system again. Okay, very good. So now we did the VMware tools as well. Now you're going to notice if you want to make this window bigger, just simply click on this one and you're going to notice right here, bingo, it's a big window that's going to actually maximize and it's going to take over your entire screen. All right, anyway, so we covered the download, the installation of Windows Server 2016. We did the VMware tools, we changed the host names, and we changed the time settings. And the next step is, or the next video is, I'm going to show you how you could manage the resources of a virtual machine. And then from that point on the third section, my partner to whom with I'm collaborating with, Abbas, will take over and he is going to go through the installation and configuration of MS SQL Server. And that's where the fun begins. I'll see you in the next lecture. Hey boys and girls, in this lecture we are going to download and install VMware Workstation Player. Once again, the VMware Workstation Player is a virtualization layer that sits on top of your computer's operating system. So this way you could utilize multiple operating systems on the same computer hardware. So we will learn how to check the system resources on your computer so it meets the required resources, and then download and install the VMware Workstation Player software on our main or host computer. Okay, so very first thing is to check the resources. So if you are using Windows, then you could simply click a Win key on your keyboard and it will open up this menu or programs menu. Type PC. This will show up this PC. If it is Windows 10, it will show up this PC. If it's an older version of Windows, it will show up perhaps my PC. When you see this icon, right click on it and then go to Properties. Okay, so in the Properties, you will see the processor information. You will see the install memory, which I have 32 gig. And you'll see I'm running Windows 10 Professional for my computer. So it doesn't matter if you have Windows 10 Pro or Windows Home Edition. All we are making sure is that we have the right resources. If you have anything less than 4, then I would say you definitely need to buy a newer computer with a higher memory and CPU. So we have enough, we have actually sufficed the processor and memory requirement. Now let's take a look at our hard drive. I'm going to close this down and I'm going to go back to my program menu and I'm going to type again PC. Again, I'm going to click on it and it will open up all the drives that are attached in my computer. This is the main drive, which is a hard disk. And total, it has 475 gig of space, out of which 271 gig is free. So I have a lot of disk space that I could use. For my Windows machine, I'm going to be using 50 gigs, so I still have a lot of leftover. So make sure you have enough required free disk space. If not, at least you should have a 20 gig of free space. Let's close this now. Now the next step is to download and install VMware Workstation Player software. All right, I'm going to go back to my programs and I'm going to go to my Firefox. This is my browser and I'm going to type download VMware Workstation Player. and it should bring me the first page, download workstation player. Right here it says try workstation 16.0 player for Windows. Click on download, save file. Now, depending where your file is being saved, make sure you could reach that folder. If you are using Firefox, you will see this arrow right here, which will indicate that the file has been downloaded. So I'm just simply going to click on this one, and it says completed, and I'm gonna, as I move my mouse over it, it will change it to open file. So click on open file. Okay, so workstation player 16 installation is starting. So it says right here on the bottom right hand corner. So depending on your computer speed, um, it could take anywhere from a minute to 5 minutes to complete the entire installation. Okay, welcome to the VMware Workstation 16 Player Setup Wizard. Click Next. So VMware End User License Agreement. I have gone through this license agreement. If you want to go through it, I would recommend go ahead before you click on I accept the terms in the license agreement. Click on this check mark. Click Next. Okay, select the installation destination and any additional features. Enhanced keyboard driver, a reboot will be required to use this feature. This feature requires 10 megabyte. You could check that, or if you're gonna check it, your computer is gonna reboot after the installation. I'm gonna leave that unchecked because we're gonna go through this lab setup and I don't want the computer to reboot during that time. And then add VMware Workstation console tools into the system path. Leave that default checked. Click Next. Check for product updates on startup. I don't like to see the product updates, so I'm going to uncheck it. Join the VMware Customer Experience Improvement Program. It's up to you if you wanted to join and participate. For now, since this is our lab, I'm going to keep it unchecked. Click Next. Create shortcuts. Desktop start menu, that's fine. Leave it default. Next and install. Okay, so please wait while the setup wizard installs VMware Workstation 16 player. Copying new files. Okay, completed the VMware Workstation 16 player setup wizard. Click the finish button to exit the setup. Okay, so the installation has completed. How do you verify the program is up and running? You go back to your computer programs, and right here it says VMware Workstation 16 player. If you cannot find or it does not show up on your programs, you could simply type here VMware and it will show up right here, VMware Workstation Player. You could go ahead and click on it. Okay, it says VMware Workstation 16 Player. Use VMware Workstation 16 Player for free for non-commercial use. So we will keep that default. And since this is what we are doing for training, not for commercial use, so we will keep that radio button on. Click Next or Continue and then Finish. Okay, so this is how our VMware console looks like. That's where we're going to go ahead and create a virtual machine and add some resources. So anyway, to manage our virtualization layer, this is the console we will be using to add or remove resources. I'll see you in the next lecture. Hello again. In this video, we are going to download and install Oracle VirtualBox. Oracle VirtualBox is exactly the same as VMware Player. It's a virtualization software, but it's a product of Oracle. Now, this download and installation is completely optional. Now, for those people who like to go with Oracle VirtualBox software, then you could follow this video. For those who are going with VMware Workstation Player, then please simply skip this entire lecture and go to the next one. Okay, so I will go to my Firefox and I will type download and install Oracle Virtual Sorry, Oracle VirtualBox. Okay, so I have the download link right here. Go to download. Okay, right here it says VirtualBox 6.1.18 platform packages, and if you are looking at this lecture maybe a month later or maybe a year later, you're probably going to see a different version. So it does not matter what version is showing up here. What matters is we are picking the right platform to install our VirtualBox. If you are using Windows for your main computer, then you will go with the Windows. If you're using OS X host, which is Mac, you will go with this one. And if you're using Linux, you'll go with the Linux one, and so on. So I'm using Windows um, 10 version. So I'm going to go with Windows host and save file. As soon as the file is saved, you're going to see this arrow come up and then it says completed. So go ahead and click on open. Welcome to the Oracle VM VirtualBox 6.1.18 setup wizard. Okay, click next. Leave everything default. Click next. Choose from the options below. Create a start menu. Create a shortcut on desktop. Create a shortcut in quick launch bar, register file association. So I like everything except this one. So again, depending on your choices, how you want to see the icon, where do you want to see the icon of this Oracle VirtualBox, you could pick depending on your choice. Click next. And installing the Oracle VM VirtualBox networking feature will reset your network connection and temporarily disconnect you from the internet. So if you're running any production application, please stop them because this is going to reset your network adapter. Go ahead and click yes and click on install. Okay, Oracle VM VirtualBox 6.1.18 installation is complete. Click Finish button to exit the setup. You could also leave the checked Start Oracle VM VirtualBox after installation. So we have to start it anyway. So click Finish, um, and it will start our Oracle VirtualBox console. Right here, if you see it, if you don't see coming up on the screen, you go to Taskbar and you will see the icon showing up here. Click on it, and there it is, Oracle VM VirtualBox Manager. And this is how your console looks like. It's pretty similar to what we have for our VMware. So let me open up a VMware VirtualBox, sorry, not VirtualBox, VMware Workstation Player. And you're probably going to notice that both are look the same. This one shows VMware Workstation for non-commercial use only. This is also for non-commercial use, but it's not stated here. We could create virtual machines by clicking on this right here. You could also do add, and this is sorry, not add. File and click on new virtual machine, which is right here, sorry, machine, and click on new, and then you'll start creating your new virtual machine. Anyway, for this entire course we have decided to go with VMware Workstation Player. So if you wanted to go with the VMware, sorry, on VirtualBox, um, please be my guest, but my recommendation is let's go with VMware Workstation Player. I'll see you in the next lecture. Hello again. In this video, we are going to create a virtual machine on our virtualization software that we have installed. Again, putting that into our diagram, we have our computer, our main computer, which is running either Windows or Mac operating system. And then on top of that, we install the virtualization software. We are going with VMware Player and we are going with Oracle VirtualBox as an optional. So you could pick either one. My recommendation is that you go with VMware Player. And then in this video, we are going to now create that virtual machine, and that virtual machine is just like a container that has these resources added to it. So minimum of 20 gig of disk space, or you could go up to 50 or 60 gig of disk space. You gotta have at least 4 gig of memory and 1 to 2 virtual CPU. Now think of a virtual machine, the container. Let's say if you are looking at the assembly line in, let's say, HP company or Dell manufacturer. The assembly line goes through the computer building. They put in the memory, they put in the CPU, they put in the disk, and that's how your computer is built. Similarly, now think of yourself, those people who are on the assembly line, and now you're going to go ahead and build your own computer. All right, so let's start our Oracle, sorry, VMware Workstation Player. So let's go ahead and type it here, VMware Workstation Player. Start it up. Okay, it has started. This is it. Now, go ahead and click on Create a new virtual machine. Here you pick I will install the operating system later. This one, if you already have the Windows operating system downloaded for you and it is actually inserted into your DVD-ROM. So you will go with this option. This option is installer disk image file, which is the ISO file, which is not like a physical disk, which will be a file, then you will select this one. Now, since we have not downloaded the Microsoft Windows ISO, we will go and with the third option. Click next. Okay, guest operating system. We will go with Microsoft Windows and we have to select the version which is my Windows Server 2016. So let's say where is Windows Server 2016? Very good. Go ahead and click next. The virtual machine name. Now, this is not the operating system name, your computer name. This is the container that we are creating. This is the name of that container. So we're gonna go with MS SQL Server. Or you could go with your own preference, whatever the name that you wanted to pick. Click next again. And by the way, this is the location where where the virtual machine will be created. Click next. Now, the maximum disk size. So I said minimum 20, and if you have enough disk space, which is recommended by the Windows, that you gotta go with 60. So I'm going with 50 just to keep an average. Now click on Store Virtual Disk as a single file and click Next. Okay, this is the virtual machine will be created with the following settings. So you have to modify certain settings because if you notice right here, the memory is 2 gig 2048. We got to change that. So click on Customize Hardware. And right here it says memory 2 gig, which is 2048 meg. So increase that to 4 gig right here. So slide this upward and it will change to 4 gig, which is 4096 megabyte. Okay, then the next one is processor. Number of processor cores selected 2 by default. You could leave that 2, or if you are really short or scarce on CPU resources, then change it to 1. Okay, new CD, DVD, auto detect, leave it as is. Network adapter, right here is selected to NAT. I want you to change it from NAT to bridged, connected directly to the physical network, which means it will allow you or your virtual machine will be able to communicate to the outside on the internet. So that is changed. Very good. Click on the USB controller. Leave that default as is. Sound card, nothing to change. Printer, nothing to change. Display, nothing to change. And now go ahead, simply click close. Verify one more time. These are the settings that you wanted for your virtual machine. And now click on finish. Okay. Now, this is your virtual machine. The container has been created. Now, what you need to do is you need to install an operating system on top of this container. And that's what we're going to cover in our next lecture. Hello and welcome back. Now we have created a virtual machine. We have installed Windows 2000 Server on top of the virtual machine. And the next step is to go with the SQL installation. But before we do that, let's take a look how we could manage our virtual machine from our virtualization software. So in this video, we will learn how to manage resources of a virtual machine and how to change your virtual machine settings. So let's start our VM workstation player. And if you notice, my virtual machine right now is powered off. If you want to make any changes to your virtual machine, make sure it is powered off. It states right here, powered off. Operating system that this virtual machine has is Windows Server 2016. Version workstation of this version we are running is 16, and the RAM it has is 4 gig. Now, you could click on Edit Virtual Machine Setting right here, or you could go to the player, Manage, and Virtual Machine Setting. Okay, the very first thing that comes up is the memory. If you want to change the memory later, and if you realize that your virtual machine or your Windows server is running slow, then you could always come here and change it to whichever the virtual memory that you want for your machine. Then the same thing goes with the processor. You could change the number of cores the processor that it needs. If you want to change the disk, as in corporate world, as the data increases, the disk space has to be increased as well. So you could expand here as well. See right here, expand disk capacity. You could click here and you could change it here. DVD and ISO image, we already have this attached that we use to install Windows Server. You could put it back to use physical drive so it doesn't start back again with the Windows installation. Network adapter, we already changed to bridge adapter. There are other network adapter connection settings that we have, NAT, host only, and custom. You could read up on it. Then USB controller, you could leave as is. And if you wanted to change the display settings, you could come here and you could adjust the display setting. Specify monitor setting. If you wanted to change it to a different monitoring setting, you could change it here. All these are the settings that can be done at the hardware level of the virtual machine setting. At the option side, in the general, if you wanted to change the virtual machine name or if you want to rename it, you could do it here. And if you wanted to repurpose it to a different operating system, you could do it here. Same thing with a working directory where it's sitting, you could do it on a different location. Power on, enter full screen mode after powering on. So every time you're going to start up your virtual machine, it's going to start up with a smaller window. If you want it to start with a bigger screen, you could enable it right here. Shared folder, any folder that you want to share from your virtual machine to your host, you could enable it here and create the folder or path. VMware tools time sync off. If you want your virtual machine to synchronize with your host, and whatever the host time is, it will synchronize that to your host. You could click on this one. Most of the time in corporate world, people have the virtual machine time synchronization with its host. There are other settings as well. You could go through it. Then we have a Unity window decorations, show borders, show badges. This is how it looks or how you want to have it displayed. And auto login. It says right now it's not enabled. Auto login settings are not available for this virtual setting. To configure auto login, ensure that the guest OS is running and that an up-to-date version of the VMware tools is running on the guest. So we could update the virtual machine setting or tools, and this will allow us to start our virtual machines and automatically log in without us putting the password of our administrator. So these are the few settings and hardware resources that you could add or remove from your virtual machines, and that's specific or something that I want to cover in case you get into a problem where your machine is running slow. Then you could come in here and add the resources as per the requirement. Hello everyone and welcome to the section 2 of this course. In this lecture, we are going to cover the Microsoft SQL Server prerequisites, meaning what are the resources needed to go through setting up our lab and of course, and then practice SQL statements. So the very first thing you need to make sure is the computer that you're going to be using for this course, you have the administrator rights on that computer, meaning you could install or uninstall a program, change permissions, and so on. Then comes the hard disk. So you should definitely spare 6 gig of minimum hard disk to set up that lab. What I'm going to do, and this is my recommendation, is I'm going to be carving out 20 gig of disk for the Windows machine, and then we will install the SQL Server. And why do we need a Windows machine? I will cover that in the later lecture. Then comes in the memory. All editions of MS SQL except Express requires 1 gig of memory at least. And if you're going with Express edition, which by the way, I'm not going to go over in this course, but let's say if you have limited resources and you still want to follow through the course, then you could go with Express edition, which only requires 512 megabyte of memory. But for us, we're gonna be using 4 gig of memory to set up that Windows machine that will have that Microsoft SQL Server installed. Then the processor speed. Minimum of x64 processor with 1.4 gigahertz of speed. Recommended is 2.0 gigahertz or faster. Also remember, only 64-bit processor is needed and required for the MS SQL Server installation. So if your computer or your PC or laptop right now has 32-bit, then you could stop right now and I would recommend that you go ahead and buy a new laptop that has a 64-bit architecture. Now, for the operating system, you have two options. You could either go with Windows Server 2016 or the newer version Windows Server 2019, whichever is available right now on Microsoft website. Let's say if you decided to go with one or the other, make sure you download and install MS SQL Server for the same edition and version. Hello. In this lecture, we are going to talk about how we could design our lab for this course. The first option that we have is for those who have limited resources. And that option is, let's say, if you have a computer, laptop, or workstation, and it has an operating system running. And in this case, let's say if you have Windows 10 operating system running, then you could simply install SQL Server, but not the enterprise version. You could install SQL Server Express, which will be installed directly on Windows 10 and will be compatible to Windows 10. And it does not require a lot of resources. Now, most of the features that I will cover in this course are not available in SQL Server Express, but you could still go through the Express and learn many things or statements about SQL. So, moving on, our recommendation and the lab that we will be setting up in this course is that we have our computer or laptop, and on that computer, let's say if there is any operating system running, and we take an example again, let's say we are running Windows 10. On that Windows 10 operating system, we will install virtualization software layer, and that layer could be VMware Workstation Player or Oracle VirtualBox. These software layer, the virtualization software, allows us to run multiple operating system on a single host or single hardware. What is a virtualization software in detail? That is something I could tell you in the next lecture. Then moving on, once we have that software layer installed, then we will create a virtual machine off of that software. And that virtual machine will have the required resources to install the Windows Server operating system. Once that Windows Server operating system is installed, then we will go ahead and install Microsoft SQL Server Enterprise Edition. And then we will go through all the basic features, advanced features, and SQL statements once we have the lab set up.
Hello friends and welcome to the third section of this course. I hope you are enjoying this course and most importantly learning and understanding the content presented so far. In first section of this course, my partner Imran Afzal gave a brief introduction about data, databases, and relational database management systems, and how they work in real world. And in the second section, Imran teaches you how to create VM for our lab environment and how to manage it once it is up and running. If you're following the instructions, by now you should have your lab environment running with Windows Server 2016 installed on it. As Imran mentioned, we will be using Microsoft SQL Server as our choice of relational database management system for this course. In this section, I will be teaching you how to download, install, and configure Microsoft SQL Server. We will start this section with our first lecture, which will cover prerequisites for Microsoft SQL Server installation, which will be followed by downloading Microsoft SQL Server and SQL Server Management Studio. In the third lecture, we will install and configure Microsoft SQL Server in our lab environment. And then we will install SQL Server Management Studio in our fourth lecture. In our final lecture, we will download and install AdventureWorks database. So let's start and see you in the first lecture of this section. Goodbye. Hello friends, welcome to the first lecture of this section where we will be talking about prerequisites for Microsoft SQL Server installation. Keep in mind that these requirements are good enough for our lab environment and also for installation in production environment. Of course, in production environments, we have much more resources available to us and we can utilize them accordingly for production workload. But for our lab environment, we will be using at least the recommended resources. We will start with the hardware requirements. Microsoft SQL Server requires at least 6 GB of available hard disk space. And the recommendation is that the file system for that hard disk should be NTFS or REFS. FAT32 file system is supported but not recommended. When we talk about memory, Express Edition requires at least 512 MB of memory, and all other editions requires 1 GB of memory. But the recommendation is that Express Edition should have 1 GB of memory and all the other editions should have at least 4 GB of memory available. Processor speed minimum requirement is 1.4 GHz, but the recommendation is 2 GHz or faster. And processor type, we can use AMD processor or Intel processor. Then we move on to software requirements. Microsoft SQL Server requires .NET Framework 4.6 for the database engine, master data services, and replication. When we talk about the network software, all the supported operating systems for SQL Server have built-in network software. What it means that if we are installing Microsoft SQL Server on a Windows Server 2016, all the required network software are already available in Windows Server 2016. There are some considerations which we should care about when we are installing Microsoft SQL Server. First is that installation of SQL Server 2016 is supported on x64 processors only. What does that it mean is that we can only install Microsoft SQL Server on a 64-bit machine, not on a 32-bit machine. We were able to do that up until SQL Server 2008 R2, but then since then it's been changed and we can only install Microsoft SQL Server on a 64-bit machine. SQL Server 16 can be installed on Windows Server 2012, 2016, and 2019. Also, you cannot run SQL Server on a domain controller under a local service account, and it is highly not recommended to run Microsoft SQL Server on a domain controller under any other service account. One more recommendation and consideration, which is for production environments especially, is to have separate disks for data files, log files, and tempdb. What are data files, log files, and tempdb? When we will be doing the installation and further going into details of Microsoft SQL Server architecture, you will understand those files and tempdb. But for now, just keep in mind that Microsoft SQL Server recommendation is that we have separate disks for data files and log files and for the tempdb. This is the end for this lecture. I will see you in the next lecture. Thank you so much.
Welcome back, friends. Today in this lecture, we are going to download Microsoft SQL Server 2016 and SQL Server Management Studio 2016. So let's start our lecture. First thing we have to do is we have to log into our virtual machine, and to do that, we need to go to VMware Workstation. For easier access for next time, you can pin this thing to start. That way it will be easier to launch next time. If you remember, in our previous lecture, we created a virtual machine and we named it as MS SQL Server, and we will launch this machine now. This will take a couple of minutes depending upon the processor speed of your computer. Once the machine is ready, you will see a prompt to press Ctrl, Alt, and Delete. While we are working in our virtual machine, we have to press Ctrl, Alt, and Insert. And this will bring into our login screen where we have to put our administrator password. Our machine is almost ready. You will see whenever Microsoft SQL Server boot, you will see a window like this, which is Server Manager. Basically, this is a window where you can do administrative work on your server, and this will always show up unless you hide it. Now, if you remember, we downloaded the Google Chrome. We will open that. And we will use this to download Microsoft SQL Server. You have to type download MS SQL 2016, and this will be the link which you will use to download Microsoft SQL Server 2016. I will also provide that link in the reference section of this lecture. Once you click that, now it gives you few options here. You can download SQL Server 2019, or you can download SQL Server 2017. You can also download SQL Server 2016, and also you can download SQL Server 2014. But as we have already decided that we will be using SQL Server 2016, so we will click that, and we will click on executable file. Continue. Again, it will ask you to fill this form. It is the same thing which we did while we were downloading Microsoft Server 2016. You can opt out from the marketing emails. Continue. And this is a small file. It will take less than few seconds to download. Now, once you run this executable, it will give you three options. The first one is basic. What does it do is it installs SQL Server with basic installation configuration. We don't want to do that. The other option is custom, where you can install Microsoft SQL Server with your own custom configurations. We also don't want to do that. We want to download the media file and we want to do the installation by our own. So we will click this. We will pick the language as English. We will make sure we select ISO image. We can see the path where it's getting saved, downloads, and we will start the download. Now, depending upon the speed of your internet, it will take anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes to download this. It's almost 2.5 GB file. So I will pause the recording for now, and once this is complete, I will come back. I'll see you then. Welcome back, friends. Download is almost complete. It is checking integrity of the file, and as soon that is complete, it will mean that our download is successful, and you can see the message. We can open the folder and can verify that SQL Server 2016 SP2 has downloaded successfully. With that, we will get out of this prompt. Now, the second thing we have to do was download Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. Same thing, we will type download SQL Server Management Studio. The first link will take you there. I will also provide the direct link in the reference section of this lecture. Now again, we have multiple options. We can download the latest version, which is SSMS 18.8, but I will prefer you to download the previous version, which is SQL Server 2016. Go to previous versions and then 16.5.3, start download. This is a much smaller file, 898 MB. It should take anywhere 5 to 10 minutes depending upon the speed of your internet. While it's downloading, I want to give you one tip. When you're done with your work for the day and you want to get out of your virtual machine, I always advise you not to just terminate the instance. Go to the instance and properly shut down your instance. This way, when the next time you will boot the machine, it will be a clean boot. You can see here the download has completed. SQL Server Management Studio setup in English, it's completed. With that, we will end our lecture, and I will see you in the next lecture where we are going to install and configure Microsoft SQL Server. Thank you so much for your time. Have a good day.
Hello friends and welcome back. Today is the big day and we are going to install Microsoft SQL Server in our lab environment. So let's jump into action. Before we start, I want to briefly talk about Microsoft SQL Server installation in corporate production environments. So in my 13 years of experience as database administrator, one thing which I can guarantee you is that most powerful machines in my company were those on which SQL Server was running. I'm talking about 96 plus CPUs, 256 GB of RAM, solid state drives for operating system, terabytes of storage attached, and separate drives for data files, log files, tempdb, and backups. But that is live production SQL servers I'm talking about. Of course, we don't have that kind of resources available in our lab environment. And what we have is a 2 CPU, 4 GB RAM, and 50 GB hard disk to work with. But to mimic production environment installation setting as much we can, I will ask you to create different folders which will be equivalent of separate drive as in production environment. This way you will have an idea and practice how things works in actual production environment. You might be having questions in your mind that what are data files, what is log file, what is tempdb, and what is backups? Well, we will talk about them in detail very soon in coming lectures. But for now, I want you to follow instructions and complete the installation of Microsoft SQL Server. First thing, as I said, we want to create some folders on C drive. The first one will be SQL underscore data underscore files. Of course, you can change the name as you want, but this is a naming convention I'm following for many years, so I will continue with that. SQL underscore log underscore files. Next one will be SQL underscore tempdb. And the next one will be SQL underscore backups. So let's go to download folder where we already have downloaded SQL Server 2016 Service Pack 2. Double click that. That will open the windows where you can start the setup process. Double click setup. Now this opened the SQL Server Installation Center for us. There are multiple tabs which we had to go through in details in coming lectures, but for now what we are interested is planning and installation. When you look into the planning, the first thing you see is hardware and software requirements. When you click that, it will open the Microsoft SQL Server website, which will tell us what are the requirements, hardware and software requirements for installation of SQL Server 2016 and 17, as we already went through them in our previous lecture, so we will skip this. The other thing which is important here is system configuration checker. We need to run this. This will launch a tool to check for conditions that can prevent a successful SQL Server installation. If you go and look into the details, we passed all the checks, like we are running this installation as system administrator. There is no pending restart, WMI service is running, and all the other things. The one more important one is that this is not a domain controller. It's always a best practice to run this check before starting the installation process. This way you will have an idea if there is something that need to be fixed. Remember, if there is a failure, we need to fix that before we can start the installation. Now come to the other tab, which is installation. Over there, one thing which you will see is new SQL Server standalone installation or add features to an existing installation. That is where we are going to run our installation process. But one more thing I want to show you here is that this install SQL Server management tools, when you click that, it also takes you to the SQL Server Management Studio download center, where you can download the SQL Server Management Studio, as we already had done this step, so we will skip that. Now click the new SQL Server standalone installation. First thing you will see here is we have to enter the product key, as we are using an evaluation version, so we don't need to, but in our production environments we have to enter the product key. We have to accept all the software license terms. One thing you will notice, it ran those pre-checks again: setup administrator, setup account privileges, restart computer, WMI services, all the checks which were ran before and some other, it ran them again. And if there is a failure, we need to fix that. We have to check this, so if there are any updates to the installation, we will have them. Now this is scanning for product updates, and as there are nothing, so it skipped that. Now it ran another check. This is to identify potential problem that might occur while running the setup. The previous was before running the setup, and this is while running the setup, so there's a difference here. Now if you see here, there are we passed 1, 2, 3, 4 .NET application, computer domain controller, and all that. One warning we have is about the Windows firewall. By default, the Windows firewall is enabled in the Windows operating system, so we need to disable that. The reason is, if we don't disable that, there might be applications which will not be able to communicate on different port because there is a firewall enabled. To do that, we go to Windows Firewall, type Windows Firewall in the search, and over there you go to turn Windows Firewall on or off. We have to turn off the Windows Firewall. Now if I rerun this, you will see that that warning will be gone. Now we came to the portion where we have to select the features. So as I told you, Microsoft SQL Server comes with a lot of services, but for now we are only interested in database engine service. Also check SQL Server application and clients tool connectivity. You can see other services like analysis service, reporting services, R server, integration service. These are other services which we can install with Microsoft SQL Server depending upon the needs of what we are going to do, and that way we know what we are going to install, and we can work on that. The one thing which I want you to look here is that once we picked up database engine server, it's showing you that the prerequisite for this selected feature is Windows PowerShell 3 or Microsoft .NET Framework. So if you pick up some services which you want to install but the prerequisites are not there, it will let you know, and also tell you the drive space it will require to install this feature. So to install Microsoft SQL Server Engine and clients tool connectivity, we need almost 1252 MB, almost like 1 GB of space. This is the instance root directory where the binaries will be installed, and this is the location where the shared features will be installed. Click next. So one thing I want you to see here, again it ran another check, product update language compatibility, and there is a knowledge base KB 2919355 installation. It ran those checks again. Setup is running rules to determine if the installation process will be blocked for any reason. Now we are here where we are going to specify the name and instance ID for the instance of SQL Server. So you will see here there are two options: default instance and named instance. So default instance and named instance are two types of SQL Server instances. The main difference between default instance and named instance in SQL Server is that there can be only one default instance in our SQL Server, while there can be multiple named instances in the SQL Server. Now you might be having question that why we need default and named instance. Well, there are scenarios in production environment where we want to install more than one SQL Server on a machine. The reason could be, for example, we want some databases to be in encrypted form and the other one not encrypted or unencrypted. Well, we can set up two SQL Server. One will be holding encrypted databases and the other one will be holding unencrypted databases. In that case, we will need two installation of Microsoft SQL Server, and the first one will be default instance and the other one will be named instance. In our case, as we are going to do only default instance and we require one instance to be installed, so we are going to pick default instance. And once you pick default instance, the instance ID automatically is MS SQL Server. If you want, you can change that, but it is a good practice to keep this name as it is. Now we are here where we will be specifying the service accounts and collation configuration. So each service in SQL Server, like SQL Server Agent and Database Engine, represents a process or a set of processes to manage authentication for SQL Server operation with Windows. So think of it SQL Agent and SQL Server Database Engine as a Windows service. Now to run those services, we need an account which can communicate between this service and the Windows. So by default, our installation is picking up local system account, which is a built-in Windows account that is available for configuring services in Windows. This is a highly privileged account and has access to all the resources in the server with administrator right. Now remember, if we are connected on domain, usually what happens is we create domain accounts for a SQL Server Agent and we create a domain account for Microsoft SQL Server, and we make them administrator and we give them rights to run these services on this machine. This is the best practice, but as we don't have the domain controller installed in our environment, so we will be relying on the local system account. One more thing I want you to change is change the startup type to automatic. What it means is that if for some reason we restart this machine, these two services will automatically start and we don't have to manually run them. One more thing here is collation. So what is collation? So collation is a set of rules that tell database engine to how to compare and sort the character data in SQL Server. We will pick the defaults SQL underscore Latin 1 underscore general. Click next. Specified database engine authentication security mode, administrator data directories and tempdb settings. So in this section we are going to set up few server configurations. The first one is authentication mode. So remember, Microsoft SQL Server have two authentications mode. One is Windows authentication and one is mixed mode. So Windows authentication mode is where it is the default one and is often referred as the integrated security because this SQL Server security model is tightly integrated with Windows itself. So specific Windows users and group accounts are trusted to log in SQL Server. A Windows user who already been authenticated does not need to present additional credential. What it means is that if you have a Windows account and you are already authenticated to log into machine, you don't, and you have permission to SQL Server, you don't need to enter the password every time to log into Microsoft SQL Server. The other mode is mixed mode, which is SQL Server authentication and Windows authentication. We already know what is Windows authentication is. So SQL Server authentication, unlike Windows authentication, save the logins and credential within the SQL Server. In Windows authentication, we save them on the domain controller. While on the mixed mode, we have SQL Server authentication where the logins are getting saved within the Microsoft SQL Server, and it also allow Windows authentication. If we enable that, then we need to specify password for the sysadmin account, or SA password. This is the most common sysadmin accounts which we use while running Microsoft SQL Server. This password must be very strong. Now add the current user. So this will become our like the user which we are logged in with, which is an administrator account. So now this also become the sysadmin, and we can add multiple accounts here too if we want to. The other thing is data directories. If you remember, we created, okay, we have an error here. Now let's find what is the error. So when I was typing the password, I did not put the password correctly in both fields. So that is why it's saying the password you entered did not match. So I need to re-enter the password. Good thing about this wizard is that it will not let you go to the next step until you fix the previous problem. Now we remember we created different folders in the beginning of this lecture. So this is where the data root directory is going to be. We are going to pick the data files, user database directory, like the databases which will we create for on our own purpose, will be also saving in this place. So we will pick that. Now the user database log directory, you remember we created a folder as SQL log files. Pick that, and for the backup we will be using SQL_backups. Now the third thing here is tempdb. Tempdb is one of the most critical part of SQL Server. SQL Server. We are going to talk about it later in our upcoming lessons, but for now I want you to remove this and add the SQL tempdb. I want you to make the initial size as 128. Same thing here for the log, 128. In production environment, of course, the tempdb is huge, because when you will learn about it, you will understand that this is one of the most critical part of the SQL Server. So we make it as big as possible, and that helps with the performance, and also depends upon the number of files. Before I think 2012, we have to create multiple files. These files, remember, this number depend upon the number of CPUs. So if we have a 4 CPU machine, so automatically this number will be 4. If you have a CPU count is 32, you will have 32 files there. Before SQL Server 2012, I guess, I assume, we have to create these files manually, but since 2012 they are allowing us, the installation itself picks up the number of CPUs and generate that many files. The next thing is file stream. So what is file stream? So if you're aware now that nowadays the data is not just about name or date of birth and things like that. Now the data also have pictures, songs, movies, and other types of file formats. So to store them, we cannot store them in the SQL Server. So what we do is that we save them on the file, and then we create a reference within the database. So that way we don't because the SQL Server don't allow you to save more than 2 GB of blob in one field, and some of those files can be bigger than that. So to enable using those kind of files in our database, we enable the file stream. Next. Okay. Uh, our installation is ready. You can go through all the things here which we set up. What are the user accounts? Where are going to be directories? TempDB configurations, TempDB location, who is going to be administrator, and all that. And this is the configuration file path. So I'm going to click install, and depending upon the size and resources on your machine available, it will take anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes. So I'm going to start the install process, and I will pause the recording for now, and I will come back when the installation is ready. Installation is complete. Hello friends, and welcome back. Our installation is close to completion, so that's why I resumed the recording. You can see multiple steps which are happening while the installation is going on. While this is happening, I just want to talk to you about SQL Server best practices which we can do after the installation. Well, these are the things which we will learn in details in coming lectures. SQL Server itself, when it get installed, there are certain performance settings that we need to make when we are going in live production environment, depending upon the size of our workload and the nature of our workload. Are we going to be on OLTP kind of database, or it's going to be more of business intelligence SQL Server requirement? So these are the things which we adjust once we install the SQL Server and we know what kind of load we are going to put on the SQL Server. Our installation is almost complete. I think this is the last step. Now it's starting the agent, and it's deleting the temporary files. And with that, our setup is complete. Now if you want to luckily for us, we did not have any issues while the installation, and we can go and check in the logs where it installed everything, the details about the installations, where the file got installed, where is the data file, and things like that about the installation. But if there was an error in installation, and you want to know more about that error, so this would be the location where you will see the error details. But as we did not have, so you will not see anything here. So now our installation is complete. How to verify that? You go to the Windows, and you will see two new folders got created: Microsoft SQL Server 2008 and Microsoft SQL Server 2016. SQL Server 2008, you will not see anything there, but for SQL Server 2016 you will see multiple options. The most important thing in SQL Server configuration, you open that, and over here you will see that our SQL Server is installed and it's running. So if you want to stop or restart your SQL Server, and without restarting the whole machine, the best practice is you go to SQL Server Configuration Manager, right click that and restart that. If there is a requirement to restart, never shut down the computer itself. This might corrupt the databases. The best way to do is through here, and this will do a graceful shutdown of Microsoft SQL Server. Now our SQL Server is installed and it's up and running. This will end this lecture. In the coming lecture, we will be installing Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. Till then, goodbye. Have a good day. Hello friends, we are here to install SQL Server Management Studio. The short abbreviation for that is SSMS. Why we need SQL Server Management Studio? Well, in the last lecture we installed Microsoft SQL Server. Now there are different ways to communicate with Microsoft SQL Server, to run the queries, to do different tasks on the SQL Server. You can do it on the command line, but the best way to do is use a graphical user interface, which is being developed by the Microsoft SQL Server. There are other third-party tools which you can use, but the best one is of course SQL Server Management Studio. So let's install that on our machine. If you remember, we already downloaded the executable. There you have SQL Server Management Studio setup. This is a pretty simple installation. You double click the file, run, and this will just install. The one thing which you want to check is location. Yeah, that's it. So this is a pretty standard installation. There is no configuration or anything need to be done. I will keep running this installation, and once this is complete, I will come back and will show you how to open and how to run a query or see how things works in Microsoft SQL Management Studio. So till then, I'm going to pause the video. Hello friends and welcome back. You can see the installation is complete, and believe me, it took more time to install SQL Server Management Studio than Microsoft SQL Server. Well, it's finally complete. So let's go and open it. You will see it under the Microsoft SQL Server, Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. It will take a couple of minutes to load for the first time because it has to check for certain things and make some registry changes. As I said, it's doing a certain task before it finally loads. This will happen for the first time only. Once it's launched for the first time, the next time it will be much faster. Well, there you go. We are in our SQL Server Management Studio. So now if you see here, the first thing you will notice that it automatically picked the name of the instance which we already installed, which was lab MS SQL. This is the server name where we installed. You remember we named the instance as MS SQL Server, but as there was a default instance, so it will go with the name of the server itself. And one more thing here, you will see authentication. There are multiple things which we can check, but for now we are interested in Windows authentication and SQL Server authentication. So if I do the Windows authentication, you will see that the password field is disabled, means because I am already logged into the machine and logged into this logging into the SQL Server, so I don't need to put the password. But if I pick the SQL Server for authentication, you remember we created the SA account. I can use that MCSF. This way we can connect it through using SQL Server authentication. Well, I will log in with the both so you have an idea. So this is SQL Server authentication. And if you notice here, we are logging as SA. You will see the name here. If I want to connect as Windows authentication, we will just go to connect server name, and we will pick Windows authentication. It will automatically pick up the name of the account under which we are logged into this machine, and it will connect. You will see the difference here. We are connected to the same server over here with SA account and over here with Windows authentication. Now let me give you a brief overview of Management Studio. Well, over here you can see the list of databases. Right now we only have master, model, msdb, mtempdb. These are system databases. Details will be followed. The security, like logins and everything. You see we have SA logins and our administrator account here. And if you want to check one thing, just to show you, if you go to properties, if you see here the server roles, this is a sysadmin account, means it has all the privileges on this SQL Server. Well, this is the installation for Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. In the next lecture we will install AdventureWorks database, which is a database from Microsoft for testing purpose, and then we will run our first queries. So let's meet in the next lecture. Till then, goodbye. Hello friends, and welcome to the last lecture of this section. In this lecture we are going to download and install AdventureWorks database. AdventureWorks database is a sample database which we can use for our learning purpose, and also can be used to test different features of Microsoft SQL Server. So let's download this and install it in our Microsoft SQL Server. Well, the first thing we have to do is go and download it. Then the download link, I will provide that in reference, but you can search for it in Google. There you go, the first link you will see here, AdventureWorks sample database. Well, when you go there, you will see multiple options. We have the OLTP, online transaction processing version of this database, data warehouse version of this database, and lightweight. And then depending upon the edition of our SQL Server, is it 2019, 2017, 2016? We have 2016, so we will download 2016. So you see this is downloaded. I want you to copy that and then move it to our backup folder which we created previously. Okay, now we need to restore that database into Microsoft SQL Server. We will go to Management Studio, and this time you will notice the Management Studio will take much shorter time to launch. There you go. And again, it's your preference how you want to log into SQL Server. I always prefer Windows authentication because this has more auditing around it. There you go. We are in the database. What we have to do is we have to restore the database. So you right click here, you'll select the option Restore Database. Now we need to select the backup set. Remember, we put it on the device. We need to find that, add. If you go to the backups, you see here AdventureWorks 2016.back. Okay. Okay. It's ready to install. For now, I don't want you to worry about all the other things here. The only thing I want you to see is that, remember, we set up the location for our user databases, C data files, so it automatically picked the C data files, and the log files are going to log files folder. Click OK, and that's it. The database AdventureWorks restored successfully. Now you can see here that AdventureWorks 2016 database is already restored. Now there are multiple things which you can do here. For now, I want you to look into the architecture of this database. You have tables here. You can see all the tables. These are basically all the tables. Then you have views. Then you have stored procedures and security. So let's run our first select statement. So how do you do that? You go and click new query, and you will type, you can cross this out. So one thing, you need to make sure that you are going to work in context of AdventureWorks database. So make sure you have AdventureWorks selected here, or to be on safe side, you can use AdventureWorks 2016. Go. So when writing a SQL Server statement, a SQL statement in SQL Server, you don't need to put semicolon like MySQL or other SQL additions. You can just put AdventureWorks and go, and that's it. And this will select AdventureWorks. Now we want to run our first select statement, which is going to be select star from, pick up the data table name. For example, we want to pick human resource employee table. So we will just move it here, or we can also type it. Select human star from human resource employee. If you run that, you will click on the execute button, or you can also press F5. There you go. We ran our first select statement, and we can see the employee structure in this dummy company. Well, that's it for installation of AdventureWorks database, and we ran our first select statement. You can play around. You can do different selects. You can check for the tables, the architecture, name, and everything. And in the next lecture, we are going to talk about data in detail, and from there we will resume our course. Thank you so much, and have a good day. Hello friends, we will be talking about fundamentals and design of a database. When we use the term database, the first thing you will notice is the word data. So the question comes in mind, what exactly is data? Well, in its most simplest form, data is collection of facts such as numbers, words, measurements, observations, or just a description of things. This data can be in two basic forms. Raw data, which is the raw input of text, numbers, and symbols that need to be processed to give it meaning. For example, if a scientist set up a computerized thermometer which records the temperature of a chemical mixture in a test tube every minute, the list of temperature reading for every minute as printed out on a spreadsheet or viewed on a computer screen is called raw data. On the other hand, when this data get processed, that means it's been grouped normally by a computer to give it some meaning and make it interpretable. It becomes information. Consider the same example we used previously where the scientists had the raw temperature readings. Now when the scientist processes that data and concludes that on different steps of that chemical reaction the temperature changes this much, this now becomes information. That was termed data in a very general form. Now let's talk about the data in context of a database. Well, in context of a database, the data refers to all single items that are stored in a database, either individually or as a set. We know that the data in a database is primarily stored in a database tables, which are organized into columns that dictates the type of data which are going to be stored in that column. So if the customer has a column titled telephone number whose data type is defined as number, then in that customer table the only thing we can insert or save is numbers. I hope you understand the meaning of data by now, and with that we will end this lecture and I will see you in the next lecture. Hello friends and welcome back. In this lecture we will understand what is database. If you recall, in the last lecture we described the term data. The second word in the term database is base. Definition of base is a structure on which something rests. Now if we combine both data and base, the term database means a structure that holds data. So the classical definition of database is that the database is an organized collection of structured information or data typically stored electronically in a computer system. A database is usually controlled by a database management system, what we call DBMS. Together, the data and the database management system, along with the applications that are associated with them, are referred to as a database system, often shortened to just database. Here let me give you an example from our daily life. In US, when we visit the doctor, we see this familiar scene where the receptionist greets us on the reception, and on her back we see a conventional paper-based file system. These files holds records of each patient visiting this doctor facility. Now when I enter the office and I tell receptionist that I have an appointment, the receptionist will go back and look for my name. My name starts with A, so she will go in the file section where the files are ordered alphabetically and look for my name and then pick up that file and take it to doctor. Now this file will contains all my medical history, my information, my drugs, anything which I am taking, any prescription medication. This way the doctor will know that what I am going through and what problem I am having. This is a classical example of a doctor visit in US. And this is the traditional file system, what we're talking about. Now think of it this way. My patient records, which were on a paper form, if I save them in a database in the form of a table, and that table have my name, last name, address, city, age, for example, and then there is another table which have my prescription drugs, the quantity of the drugs, timings of the drugs. Now these tables combined together makes a database. And this whole system is referred as a database. I hope this explains you how the traditional file system get converted into a database. Now one thing will come into your mind, that from moving from file system, we also have the option to create spreadsheet. Why we want to go and use a database? Well, there are multiple reasons for that. The difference between a database and spreadsheet depends upon the convenience and how we store the information. The primary difference is that the data is stored differently on in an Excel sheet, and also who can access the data and how much data can be stored on an Excel sheet. So the spreadsheet or Excel sheets were originally designed for one user. They are great for a single user still, or a small number of users who do not need to do a lot of incredibly complicated data manipulation. Databases, on the other hand, are designed to hold much larger collection of organized information in massive amounts. I'm talking about terabytes of data. Also, databases allow multiple users at the same time to quickly and securely access and query the data using highly complex logic and language. I hope this lecture will help you understand what is a database, how the databases are different from the traditional file system, and what is the difference between a database and a spreadsheet, and why we prefer the database on spreadsheet. So thank you so much for listening to this lecture, and I will now see you in the next lecture. Goodbye. Hello friends, and welcome back. So now we will try to understand how data gets saved in a database. But before we proceed, I want you to keep in mind that we are not talking about data, how it is saved on a hard disk. Most of us know that the computer storage works in binary language, where everything gets stored in 0 and 1. Well, details of that storage is beyond the scope of this course. Our focus will be how data is getting saved within the database. So very simply talking, inside a database, data is stored into tables. Here is an example of a table of a company employee, and you can see in this table we are saving employee number, name, age, department, and salary. This is the basic unit of storage in a database, which is called table. If you remember structured query language, we talked about it, and we said that the data need to be in a structured form. This means that all the data that has going to be stored in a database should be in standardized manner. And when we standardized the data, we use tables, and that is why the table get created. Tables are the simplest objects for data storage that exist in a database. Now, there might be a small confusion that table would be mistaken for databases or database for a table. I want to clarify that the table itself is not a database. To clarify this concept, the correct way to see a database is like a folder, and in that folder you have text files with information. In case of a database, these files with information are actually the tables that contains the data. So the table is just like a file with text inside a folder. I hope it made it easy for you to understand how data is getting saved in a database and why we are structuring it, and what is the difference between table and the database. With that, I will end this lecture and I will see you in the next lecture. Hello friends and welcome back. Today we are going to talk about a very important concept in databases, which is called key. So in the real world applications, number of tables required for storing the data is huge, and the different tables are related to each other as well. Also, table stores a lot of data in them, and tables generally extends to hundreds of thousands of records stored in them. Most of the time they are unsorted and unorganized. Now, to fetch any particular record from such data set, you will have to apply some conditions. But what if there is a duplicate data present, and every time you try to fetch some data by applying certain conditions, you get the wrong data. To avoid all this, keys are defined to easily identify any row of data in a table. So a key is a data item that exclusively identifies a record. So let me give you an example. Here we have a table which have student records for a college. Now if I ask you to get me the email address for John, you have to run a query where condition will be the name is equal to John. But we have a problem here. We have a duplicate entries for name John. So we will not get the right email address for the John which we are looking for. To avoid this problem, what we can do is that we can create a key on student ID, which means if I have a key on student ID and I query that table with that key, which is 1005, I will get the right email address for the John which I am looking for. Now if you see here, the student ID in our case was good enough to have be the key on this table. But in some cases we might need more than one attribute to be the key on that table. So in this particular table, we know student ID is unique. Also we know that email is going to be unique too. So we can combine them together and we can make it a composite key. Well, this is also a kind of key and we will talk about it in future class. Remember, keys are also used to generate relationships among different database tables. We talked about that there could be a number of tables in a database, and these tables are most of the time uh, connected to each other, and the way they connected to each other is through the keys. And for that purpose the foreign key is used. As I said, when we move to the next lecture we will be talking about in details about the different kinds of keys. For now, what you understood here is that the key is an important part of a table, and that is used to exclusively identify a record in a table. I hope this cleared your concept of keys, and we are ready to move on to the next lecture where we will be talking about different kinds of keys. Take care, and I will see you in the next lecture. Hello friends and welcome back. In our last lecture we talked about keys and how they are critical to relational database management systems. Today in this lecture we will talk about different type of keys and how they are used in a table. But before we can create a key, first thing is we need to identify which column or columns can serve as a key. This is where we analyze the table and look for candidate keys. A candidate key is an attribute or set of attributes that uniquely identifies a record. If we look into our student info table, we can see there are 5 columns: student ID, name, class, date of birth, and email. If I ask you to identify a student John in this table, you will have a problem, which is which John I am talking about. The John whose date of birth is January 8, 2008, or the John whose date of birth is January 17, 2007. So we can clearly say that the name alone cannot be used to uniquely identify a record. But when we look at into to the student ID, we can see even though the name is same for John, but their student ID is different. Similarly, their email address is also different. So we can say that student ID and email can uniquely identify any student or any record in this table. That is why we can say student ID and email are candidate keys for this table. Now remember, the tables can have multiple candidate keys. In our case, student ID is a candidate key, and similarly email is also a candidate key, meaning we can have more than one keys that can serve as a candidate keys. And among the set of the candidate keys, one candidate key is chosen as primary key. So we have student ID and email. So either one can be used as a primary key. Okay, now we are onto the primary key, but before that I want you to notice one thing in this table, name, which is student info. If you see that the student info starts with a small letter S and the word info starts with a capital I. This is a normal practice where the DBAs start the table name with a small letter and the subsequent word in that table used is a capital letter. This is a practice which we DBAs use, and it's not mandatory for you to use that, but this is something it's used among the DBAs. Okay, moving on to primary key. So a primary key is a set of one or more fields or columns of a table that uniquely identify a record in a database table. In the last slide, we understand how the candidate keys works and what are the candidate keys. So imagine we picked up student ID and email as our candidate key in our last slide. Now we want to create a primary key. So we can pick up either one of them as a primary key. The student ID can be a primary key and email can be a primary key. They individually can identify a row in this table. So if I ask you what is student ID 1002, so you can uniquely identify that the record associated with it, which will be student name would be Edward, class would be third year, date of birth will be April 12, 2005, and his email address would be edward@mycollege.com. Similarly, we can make email as a primary key, because you can see that in this table email address is unique and can identify a student. Now there are some characteristics of primary key that is a table can have only one primary key and one candidate key can select as a primary key. So we cannot have more than one primary key on a table. Yes, a primary key can consist of one or more than one column, but primary key itself would be just one. The primary key should be chosen such as that its attribute are never or rarely going to change. So imagine if you are in a school and you have assigned a student ID, for example 1002. There is very less chance during your stay in this college or school your student ID going to get changed. Similarly, email address, once you have assigned an email address, it is highly unlikely that email address is going to get changed. That is why it's a good practice to pick up an attribute which is never or rarely going to get changed. One important thing that a primary key cannot be null. So there's a difference between a null and an empty record. Uh, we will explain that in our future lectures. For now, just keep in mind that a primary key cannot have a null value. Also remember that primary key field contain a clustered index. So an index is basically a pointer by which we save the records on the storage level. We will talk about indexes in coming lectures, so we will further look into that. Now let's move on to secondary key. Candidate keys that are not selected as primary key. So we had two candidate keys to start with, student ID and email. Then we made a primary key, student ID. Now the email, which is also a candidate key but was not selected as a primary key, is called a secondary key. Secondary key can also work as a primary key, but it's not actually a primary key. So we can think of it as a primary key, but we are not going to use it as a primary key. It's also called an alternate key. The next key we are going to discuss is a unique key. A unique key is a set of one or more attributes that can be used to uniquely identify the records in a table. Same way, student ID and email are unique keys. Unique keys are similar to primary key. There is no difference between them. The only thing different, because it is not selected as a primary key, so we can have a null value. But keep in mind the primary key does not allow null value. So this is the major difference between primary key and unique key, that primary key don't allow null value while the unique key allow a null value. And unique field contain a non-clustered index. Primary key had a clustered index and unique field contains a non-clustered index. The next one is composite key. A composite key is a combination of more than one attributes that can be used to uniquely identify each record. So you see the difference here. It says a combination of more than one attributes. So imagine instead of picking up student ID as our primary key, if we together make student ID and email a primary key, this will be a composite key. A composite key may be a candidate or a primary key. So we can think of them as a candidate key, or we can actually make them a primary key. So the most important keys after the primary key is foreign key. Let's talk about it. A foreign key is a field in a database that is primary key in another table. It will be better if I give you an example. This way you will understand it better. So previously we had one table, student info table. Now we have another table which is invoice info table for the same database. Now in this table, invoice number is a primary key. What it means is that we cannot have a duplicate invoice number for this table. But you see here the student ID, which was the primary key in the student info table, is also there in invoice info table. Now if you look into it, you can see that student ID 1002 Edward, and then if you match that in the invoice info table, you will see there are two invoices against that student ID. So student ID is is a foreign key for this table, and in the student info table it's a primary key. Now the purpose of foreign key is to generate the relationship between the tables. So now if you can see, there is a relationship between the student info table and invoice info table, and that relationship is based upon student ID. So for example, if I ask you that invoice info table, the invoice number A8854, who was the student? So what you have to do is that first you will pick the student ID from invoice info table, and then you will match it with the student ID in the student info table, and from there you will pick the name of that student and the email address. This is how relationship works between the relational database management system database tables. Remember, a foreign key can accept a null value and also a duplicate value. So you can see here that 1002 student ID appears more than one time. So there is a duplicate, and that is allowed for a foreign key. But over here in the student info table, where student ID is a primary key, we cannot have a duplicate value for student ID. I hope this lecture was good enough for you to understand the concept of keys and the different types of keys. Keep that in mind that the concept of key is very critical to relational database management systems, and when we are designing a database for a company or for a product or for any other reason, the keys plays a very important role. So I would ask you to read more about keys and understand why the keys are so important and what are the consideration we have to follow when we are setting up a keys, because the way keys are going to work in our database would be a big help when we are going to run the queries against our database. Thank you so much for listening to this lecture. Hope it will be uh, informative and you learned a lot about keys from this lecture, and I will see you in the next lecture. Thank you so much.
If you want to learn more about Linux, check out my best-selling course on Linux at udemy.com, or you could go straight to my website utclsolutions.com and you will find the exact same course there.